mistake or a broken passport.
Nera Schwartz is the first to be issued a non-binary U.S. passport in Singapore.
I've done more education of border control authorities than I really ever thought I would do in my life.
Today, Nera discussed their transition.
Gender, as usual, I find myself stuck in the middle, spending a lot of time all the way through to my 30s trying to make the definition of man fit and not succeeding. It wasn't really my life.
And the power of workplace representation.
If I had seen a transgender person, non-binary specifically, in just a position of seniority at any firm, in any industry, that would have been incredible. It would have meant the world.
You're the first person to be issued a non-binary passport, American passport in Singapore. Why is that important to you?
Well, I think it's important for all non-binary individuals, but it definitely has a personal importance to me. The change that allowed for non-binary citizens to get a X gender marker on their passport occurred just on Transgender Day of Visibility, I believe, only maybe 2 years ago now. At that point in my transition, it really was sort of just something that I, at that point, couldn't even dare to imagine going for and getting, because it just, I was quite reserved about it. I wasn't out about it very much to only more than a few friends. And seeing that option, though, was just sort of this spark of realization. I could carry an identity document with me that would affirm that non-binary was a valid choice from the bureaucratic standpoint, from the very basic paperwork standpoint. If I show up at border control and I sound like this and I look like I do, an X actually is more informative for border control individuals, for passport control, because it actually shows them the marker that says, yes, I am seeing a combination of masculine and feminine traits, something man and woman at the same time. And thus, it's accurate.
One of the reasons why I really appreciate and I like talking to you is that you always think about these issues in a way, and you communicate these issues and why we need to have these resolutions that you just mentioned, an X on a passport, in a way to be understood by anyone rather than just by the queer community. Obviously, most listeners are at least sympathetic to our cause, so I'm really preaching to the choir. We're both preaching to the choir if we say, like, yeah, it's important for identity purposes and whatnot. But what you're saying is quite cool. I've always enjoyed hearing that from you.
Well, it's also through experience. Thank you for that, of course. But it's also through experience that I have now gone through many border checkpoints with this document. And while they're genuinely sometimes surprised by it, once they understand what it is, and I've done more education of border control authorities than I really ever thought I would do in my life. And I'm also very calm now getting pulled out of a line or, going to the side room to have a discussion, because the discussion's never what have you done or, we don't trust you. The discussion is, what's this mean? What is okay, like we've not seen this before, so are you? And then suddenly I'm giving an education to to individuals who are just genuinely they're just workers trying to do their job, right? They may not necessarily have been coached in the idea that there's going to be a third valid marker on this, and they think, maybe I've heard things like, is this a mistake, or is this genuinely just nothing like you can't be this, nothing stating that there is something inherently wrong with who I am, but them trying to piece together. And they usually do quite quickly as they begin to hear my voice, as we begin to discuss the matter. They go, oh, okay. There's a sort of a moment of just going, oh, okay, it's not a mistake. We didn't know about this. Interesting. And okay, we'll just file this down and please continue. They send me back to the line with something usually written on the side or a piece of paper, and they're like, oh, okay, and they file it, and I continue on with no major issue.
And I'm imagining it's mostly like Asian uncles and aunties that are they're like, what is this?
Yeah, usually just, again, a real inquisitiveness. They don't assume negativity. They just often don't know. And of course, if you remain calm and simply, act like nothing is wrong, they will begin to realize, okay, maybe I don't know something, because this person seems oddly calm about having what would, I guess, in my view, be a broken passport. Right? Like this,
right.
Shouldn't they be more flustered, frustrated, or otherwise surprised by this? And they I think it reflects my demeanor reflects that I'm not concerned, and thus they lose their concern pretty quickly. And after a short discussion, we sort things out and, we go about our way. It's just merely a matter of, showing that, yeah, this is just my identity document and there's nothing wrong with it. And I will continue to come through this border periodically. So just, if I can help, let me know. But otherwise, yep, it says X. It's not a typo. It's not an error. And it means somebody who's not, I usually don't say non-binary because that's jumping to a term that actually is sometimes more confusing than we expect for non-LGBTQ persons or those who don't, or allies who have spent time learning the language. It's usually just better to say something simpler and using terms that they know along the concept of, it's being a bit of a man and a bit of a woman, something like that, which it makes it less, again, you're not introducing anything necessarily new. You're using a combination that might be new, but you're not using any terminology that's going to alienate or confuse or otherwise. I mean, in the case of crossing a border and such, you don't want to raise suspicion that you might be making something up, for example. That's just in the context of any sort of professional or, police related or security related interview or discussion. You don't want to sound like you're messing with people or possibly, or just leaving them confused and frustrated. As you mentioned about how I break things down into simpler terms and try to make sure that can be communicable to everyone. Well, to an extent, I have to do that on a fairly regular basis. And it's sometimes more efficient to just use terms that already exist and express myself as a combination of them. In time, I would like for people, of course, to have the concept of non-binary in their head because it is a shorthand for a lot of things that I would otherwise take a while to explain. But if they don't have that term, it is still better just to simply discuss what I am in words that they already know. And that usually is a good starting point. I don't think it's the end point, but for most practical purposes and day-to-day interactions where people might be surprised or want to know more, I try to stick with terms that aren't new to them. And then if they're curious, I'm sure they will go look around and find out more about it. Or at the end of the conversation, I might mention the term for me is non-binary or something, but that will be after I have gone through all the explanation, not before.
You just answered my next question, which was, what do you say to them? And I, again, really appreciate how you are thinking in their shoes as well. Obviously, with the world the way it is today, there's a lot of identity politics and extreme opinions about especially contentious words. So you mentioned non-binary, meaning either a word that they've never heard of, so they think you're making something up, or it's a word that they have heard of and that could actually be worse.
And what are their connotations to that word, precisely?
Exactly. So I appreciate how, for the sake of just the respect for everyone, you're just thinking, all right, how can I communicate what I need to communicate in a way that's respectful to me and what I want out of this, but also that they can understand. And
understanding is actually the theme that I've in all of my engagements, whether in the matters of how I engage with pride related matters or how I engage with allies or how I just engage with any strangers, is understanding that understanding is the objective. This is a thing for me, is that I'm not always keen on getting somebody to, quote, accept me, because I see that as a later stage item. In the very beginning, when you see and experience something new, you want to understand it. Being asked to accept something before you understand what you're even being asked to accept can be very daunting and, quite frankly, could put you in a position where you're afraid, quite frankly. Like, if I accept this but I don't know what it is, well, would anyone really want to do that in almost any circumstance, like irrespective of LGBTQ matters, right?
Yeah. This echoes perfectly to one of our earlier guests this month, Daryl Yang. He's a longstanding activist in Singapore, and he loves the quote, "Activism without understanding and listening is performance rather than persuasion." Specific to what you're saying, I really love that you're emphasizing this is the start. We're not the world in general, and especially in an Asian context, we're not ready to automatically assume that people have a base knowledge about the topics that we live and breathe every day. And so you're saying, I want to start with something approachable, but I'm not sitting here and saying, this rudimentary level that I'm saying right now is all we can ask for.
The reason that I am focused so much on this is because I experience this very often. Statistically, I am likely to be someone's first exposure to a non-binary individual and a transgender individual as well. I don't think people intend to be rude or hurtful, but they can be very surprised, and people can panic when they're surprised. And as a result, I certainly don't want to be the person who causes someone to have a moment of panic. I want them to understand that this is a valid and different presentation than what you're used to, but I understand that you don't see this often. That, or if ever, in fact, this may be the very first time you're encountering it, and it may even be just so jarring that this person isn't even acting like anything is wrong. And that's actually something I have to think about a lot, which is that it happens a lot. I walk off the train, right, and I'm saying, excuse me, I'm trying to get off the train. And people who are with me or myself occasionally sometimes can see as I pass by people, there's a double take moment. Because, and this happens a lot, where it's because the person who passes them doesn't look like the voice that was saying, excuse me. So they look behind themselves. They look behind. They look for the person with the voice. And then their head snaps back. Now, by that point, I'm usually not looking at them, but I can usually see it where there's just sort of this double take moment of, wait, where's the person who said to excuse me? Because they're not, under most circumstances, why would one expect to hear a deep voice and then see a feminine appearing person walk by? I want this to be very clear. These are not negative reactions. They are reactions of surprise, sometimes bewilderment, sometimes confusion, but generally speaking, not negative reactions, just reactions of having to rapidly accommodate something that up until that exact moment that I walked through or asked them to ask excuse me, they did not think that day that they were going to have to process the concept of more gender expressions than the two that they are most familiar with. And suddenly here they are, and completely unprepared. Just because I happened to be walking through, I may have said something. It has happened when I just strike up a conversation with my friends on the MRT, and suddenly there's just you can see out of the corner of your eye, this person like, wait, where's that? It's usually this my partner calls it the where's that voice coming from moment, because they don't expect it to be coming out of me, and then gradually they accommodate to it and they go back to whatever they were doing. But there are those moments, and they are frequent enough that it's clear that this still is not something that is, shall we say, normalized. You do not encounter non-binary individuals on a regular basis in this country, and probably really anywhere else. I wouldn't say that it's Singapore specific.
Give us a quick overview of how you found yourself at this part of the world. I know you're American, so
yes.
A little bit about your journey here to Singapore. You've been here for over a decade.
I was chasing someone I loved very much, my wife, and I mentioned the partner earlier, and I should clarify quickly that I am a polyamorous individual. That's not polygamous, by the way. Terms are important. Polygamous implies multiple wives. Polyamory is multiple loves, poly and amorous. And I'm still with my wife of 17 years. 12 years ago, was in a position where I had already asked my then fiance, so I had asked her to marry me. I had met her in university, and I knew that she had grown up, actually, in Singapore and Japan. Her dad had worked for a major financial institution and had been moving around the world when they were growing up. So one of her brothers actually was born in Singapore, and another was born in Japan. And she was the only one actually in the family of her siblings born in Ireland itself. But she basically said to me, look, I really do want to go back to one of the countries that I grew up in. And, well, I did not wish to lose my wife to be my fiance. And I went and asked my company at the time, quite frankly, and I was working in cybersecurity then, and I'm working in it now. I came up with a very simple pitch of, could I just be your night shift? Because Singapore and Japan were on the other side of the earth. So I said, I'll be the person that does the same thing I'm doing today, but during the overnight hours. And then, at this time, there hadn't been as much expansion in cybersecurity, much less out into this part of the world. So that argument was viewed as quite persuasive. It took about still 11 months of bureaucracy and to make that actually happen. And I jetted off to Singapore with just a job transfer. And my fiance at the point, she had not yet actually gotten a job. Well, or actually, she had gotten the job, but it was going to take her about a couple more months of training. So I ended up going to Singapore first, 6 months in advance. That was probably one of the most surprising things I've ever done, not just to me, but to my family. You know, people talk about these things. Oh, we'll go abroad. We'll go, you know, I'll move to the other side of the earth, maybe try something out there, you know. No one really expects this to actually happen. And then suddenly I was getting on the plane, and I still remember my mother just being like, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm so proud of you. That's the thing. You do things for love that you would never expect. And that has been really the core of the journey, doing things for love that you never expect and finding along the way that so many good things come from that. My entire career is based off of the fact that I came out here because I loved somebody and wanted to stay with them. It is not the usual story that I came out here for career and I found love. Though in the end, I did eventually find love during my transition where I met my partner, and that was a surprise as well, and continued into a very lovely situation right now where that partner also asked me to marry them, but I cannot legally marry them. So I have a fiance and a wife.
Maybe can you share a little bit about the kind of family that you grew up in and what most people out of that environment tend to do?
So I had a very wonderful environment and a very large supportive family, particularly from the mother's side. The expectations, I'd say it's actually very quintessentially American. The idea of like, I really want to see you follow your passion, do what makes you happy. You know, all those, they sound like platitudes that are a bit unattainable. And truth is, it is difficult to obtain all of those things. But that really was the hope, right? An interesting fact, though, is that for this environment, right, one would think that I would have come out to my parents earlier. And I didn't. When I met my now wife in university, I met her because I wanted to buy these women's jeans that were on sale in this little pop-up store in our campus building. And she was selling them. She was selling her clothes to make some extra beer money. And I just go up and I just, of course, end up talking to this person. And next thing I know, I'm there for 45 minutes and I'm still talking to this person. And then next thing I know, I get the jeans for free. And that's lovely. The next thing I know, and then next thing I know, I'm being asked to help carry everything to they couldn't be sold to the free use basically the sort of charity
That was your
store.
payment.
Yeah, I did. Well, no, I think it was just more like it was the right thing to do. But you know, it was just sort of I came up here to just pay $20 for some jeans, and here I am now having these incredible conversations with this woman, and I am just, you know, helping her out and just enjoying my time with her, and did not expect this day to go this way. And I say this because when I said to this was around November, and in late November in America, we have Thanksgiving. And I told my parents, oh, I'm bringing home there'll be a surprise when I come home. And it was my, you know, my then girlfriend I was bringing home. But my mother confessed to me after I came out to them about 3 years ago as non-binary, that they had thought that I was coming home in a dress. They had thought that so I wasn't doing a very good job at hiding this, I guess. You know, I thought I was this is a recurring story I hear it amongst a bunch of LGBTQ persons I've met, that everyone thinks they're real subtle about themselves, but there are definitely hints that I guess are given off, because my parents were very surprised that I wasn't actually genderqueer, would I guess be the term used at the time. And I bring this up because the term non-binary didn't really exist. As far as I know, this would have been around 2007. And I didn't have words for what I was. And that was a struggle too, and part of the reason that I had a wonderful trans support group on campus at the time in university. But they were all binary trans individuals, by which I mean they were transitioning from man to woman or woman to man. And I definitely felt kinship with the need to change my gender presentation, but I could not get on board with the idea of basically switching from man to trans woman, changing purely into the other binary choice. That it didn't feel right. And I was looking through my old Google Docs, and I actually stumbled upon a is rant the right word? Missive. I had written in 2011, but it opened with the line, and I'm not making this up. It shocked me when I found it a year ago. It said, "Gender, as usual, I find myself stuck in the middle." And I was writing this at a time when, again, non-binary was not part of the lexicon, at least as far as I knew. And to just see that and to see those words and realize that, because I went back and I asked all my friends from, late teens to early 20s, what did I give any hints? And they would just immediately start laughing. And they're like, yes, of course, constant, like all the time. Like, and
It wasn't just a Google Doc.
No, it wasn't the
everything.
Google Doc. It was, that it's just, you begin to forget, unfortunately, over time. And that kind of is sort of, there is a sad part to this story, which is spending a lot of time in my 20s all the way through to my 30s, trying to make the definition of man fit and not succeeding but trying so very hard to, because and this is the strange sentence, I was good at it. I was good at being, quote, a man. But just because you're good at something doesn't mean it's what you want for yourself. And I'm trying to bring this back to the original prompt here, but like the when I came out to my parents just recently and how they had expected it for so long, I guess it's more that I had to know what I was and understand what I was. It's not enough to have an extremely supportive environment. It also requires self-understanding, and also for the people in that supportive environment to have their own understanding. It still took time after I came out to my parents as being non-binary for them to catch up, so to speak, on all the terms and get familiar with it so they could have a conversation, and then we could establish understanding. And then, of course, I mean, they wanted to accept me. I think any parent really does at the core want to accept their child, but if they don't understand what they've chosen, the words that they have chosen that help them understand who they are, that can be a huge roadblock. Parents want, I think, to understand their kids, but when they start throwing around terms or concepts that they've never heard of before, or they've only heard of in a negative context, it can be very, very problematic for creating understanding. So it's tricky. Terms are essential, and there was no ability back then for me to show anyone, or for me to even find what a non-binary person would even look like. I knew none. I knew zero. Today, it would be effortless to just type non-binary into Instagram or TikTok and find plenty of non-binary people just living their lives and just seeing real people.
Can you share about your transition process in Singapore? I know it is fairly recent.
Yeah.
And particularly, I want to ask if there were any fears of doing it here as opposed to going back to the U.S.
It never occurred to me to go back to the U.S. to
That is
transition.
crazy to
Never occurred to me. One, because Singapore does have an absolutely excellent medical system. The healthcare here is, well, for one thing, far superior in many respects to the United States. So maybe that's part of the reason, but that's more of a question mark around how the United States handles healthcare matters, and I do not want to get into that. Doing it in Singapore, transitioning in Singapore, I'm going to use this word carefully, it was painless in the sense of the process. The thing is that I knew what had to be done. I knew what I would need from what professionals, and if I got myself the diagnosis that accurately described me as what I was going through, then further professionals like endocrinologists who work on hormone-related matters and psychologists who would evaluate my overall psychological condition and that I was sure of what I was going through, along with, again, the original diagnosis, which comes from a psychiatrist who says this person does indeed fulfill the qualifications of having this condition. So long as you check these boxes gradually, and this is the thing, gradually may be a term that is frustrating for a lot of listeners and a lot of others to hear because it doesn't happen super rapidly. It takes time to go through all of these items. I know by comparison, the United States, it can be very, very quick to getting access, usually through private clinics, to medical care in certain jurisdictions for these kind of transitions. But the Singapore experience for me was very much just let's go through these steps and then we will go to the next step and the next step and the next step. And now I am here. I was able to go through the public health system in many respects. Changi General Hospital is where I have quite a few of my regular check-ins with my endocrinologist and my psychologist, as well as have other routine procedures that are done. And that's the thing. The procedures that are done are sometimes really, really thoughtful. The ones that I didn't even think about that relate to making sure, for example, that sometimes it can affect the density of your bones transitioning through the hormonal changes. And they just want to do a cross-check to make sure that you're not going to lose any density in your bones from transitioning due to the hormone changes. And I don't even think I've heard of that in the context of the US. In terms of Center of Excellence for Medical Care, we all know that Singapore is really, really good. And in terms of going through the process, I had no significant challenges outside of sometimes just having to wait for a slot to open up, which did occasionally take time. But I mean, that really is the biggest impediment I can think of during the entire experience. It just, sometimes I'd have to wait a little longer than I guess I would like to get an appointment, but it was perfectly, I mean, it wasn't like anyone else was getting it ahead of me. So it was fine. The Institute of Mental Health, the Changi General Hospital, everybody has been really helpful and supportive. And it did take a little time, but that was my experience. I'm struggling to answer your question because, well, I guess I could ask you, what kind of challenges would you have foreseen?
The reason why I asked that question is because there is that prevalent fear, especially amongst younger LGBTQ folks, about whether or not Singapore is a safe space for them to explore their identities. And, you think about that gender anxiety, I guess, which, and I've heard, I went to a fairly liberal college in Singapore, and that did come up, and there was this like, oh, I guess I have to figure this out in the UK, or I have to figure this out in the US, from Singaporeans, actually. And what I have heard from both you and Elise, who was in season 1, and she identifies as a trans woman, she said the same thing. She said, actually, it was quite straightforward. Singapore's very efficient. And, she even mentioned, you can even go to Bangkok if you want to get like a higher tiered service or a faster service or whatnot. But the resources are here. And so she was saying, like, I would hate for people to think that the resources aren't here in Singapore.
I would hate for that too, because they very much are.
So you've been in Singapore for 12 years, and now you've rose through the ranks to be a leader within your firm. You were at the same firm during your transition. How did that affect your day-to-day, if any? And how does that affect you as a leader as well within the firm?
Well, first, I'll just start with the fact that in the finance and tech industries in Singapore and elsewhere, there are a lot of policies and a lot of effort to create a culture where your full self can be brought to work, essentially. And that is usually inclusive of LGBTQ related support. So the funny thing about answering this question is that not a whole lot changed. What is more striking was just how much more I could be myself at work. Because prior to that, I was trying to fit into the mold of what a man should be and, a rising leader, as you say, in the org. And since I've transitioned, I'm much more positive and excited to be myself. I no longer have this filter. I'm not trying to be somebody anymore, whether that's at work or elsewhere. And it wasn't necessarily strictly because I was trying to hide the fact that I was a non-binary person. It's more just that you get obsessed with the idea of perfection of an identity that you can see yourself trying to, or maybe succeeding in obtaining. It's valid. There should be men and women alike who see themselves at the top of their field, but I was chasing one of their dreams. I wasn't chasing what it meant for me to be myself at the office and enjoy that experience. The thing is that it's the other way around. You don't chase the identity in order to become successful. You're successful because you are living as who you are. I'm me, and I'm enjoying being me. I'm happy that I get to express myself as I am, and I am then focused entirely on doing my work because I don't need to think about whether people understand me or not. Not necessarily whether they accept me, of course. I think that it's important to continue to grow acceptance, but tolerance requires understanding. For people to just be like, I don't quite fully get what non-binary persons are, but Nera seems like a perfectly good human being who's doing good work in their field. And I've learned from maybe an LGBTQ pride event what these terms are and how this explains why they dress as they do and why they act the way they are. But then that's about it. They may not need to go further in that journey, and that may be totally fine. That we are able to go to the office together, work, get along on things other than LGBTQ matters, because there's so much more in any sort of interaction, workplace or otherwise, between people that is not connected to your gender or your sexuality. Like, it's just not relevant. And it can be less relevant when you understand the oddity, the weirdness, the thing that you didn't know before, the thing that constantly just leaves you with a question mark. People will think so much more in a workplace or otherwise about gender or sexuality questions when they don't necessarily have answers, right? The questions stick with them and become these sort of, endlessly looping things in their minds, like, oh, that person's transgender, oh, that person's non-binary, that person may be gay, lesbian, whatever. Like, without understanding that this just means a handful of slight changes, more or less. I mean, even though this may seem drastic, one's appearance is not truly that. Is it really that dramatic an adjustment? Really, I mean, it's uncommon, but it's not necessarily something that when you understand that it's a mixture of, say, man and woman or otherwise masculine and feminine qualities. Once you've got a term for it and you can say, oh, yeah, they're non-binary, then it can kind of go away from the back of one's mind. These sort of employee networks that try to make some sort of resource to allow people to gain understanding if they want is really helpful. It isn't just about having the LGBTQ persons come together and feel a sense of community. It's about a wider community of those who are supportive of LGBTQ persons and those who may not understand LGBTQ persons, who may not necessarily consider themselves outright advocates, but maybe they just want to understand and learn more. And having those kind of opportunities matters a lot, and then creates an environment where all I have to do now is just focus on my work. I cannot stress this enough. I do not think about being non-binary at the office outside of anything that is strictly connected to an LGBTQ event, which would make sense that I'm thinking about it then. A transgender person, non-binary or otherwise, I would guarantee you isn't going out there every day thinking, I'm transgender, I'm non-binary. That may happen because something may occur that reminds them that they're different, and thus that they will end up thinking about it. But when things are going really well, and I guess when I say well, when I'm focused in on work and I'm at the office, I can go the entire day easily without thinking about the fact that I'm a transgender person at the office. It just doesn't matter. It was, of course, I guess the word would be interesting during the first couple of months that I transitioned, because you're seeing one person appearance-wise seeming and change their name, change their appearance. That can be just something notable, and the discussion around it isn't necessarily out of malice or or confusion or even disgust. It's often just out of surprise, confusion, bewilderment. And then once that peak of interest passed, it faded away really quickly and just became, well, yep, this is normal now. And it's nice. It's really nice to not think about that anymore, because it was so much worse when I was there acting like someone I wasn't. It was worse for me, definitely, but I think it was also worse for others, because the person I was acting like wasn't exactly the person that I would have wanted to be. I don't think that's an LGBTQ thing. I think that's a universal experience. Somebody trying to become something and being grumpy about not being it is just less of a person than I think we want to surround ourselves with, and that's on any matter. So we should always be, I think, aiming for allowing anybody to be themselves on these matters in a workplace or otherwise, because you're just gonna be yourself, and that's just so much better for you, and it's actually probably so much better for your colleagues and for anyone else.
That was such a good answer. Even the inspiration for this podcast, which is talking about queer professionals or leaders in the workplace, I think there is exactly that, which is, at the end of the day, I don't think any of us are sitting around being like, I'm gay or I'm a lesbian and I do this. We're not really like stitching those identities together. But what you said is, if we're in an environment where we are feeling discriminated against or ostracized, then we are constantly then forced to be reminded about this, right? Or on the other hand, maybe you pass really well and you can act as this normal cisgender straight man or woman, then internally you're also in turmoil. What these LGBTQ awareness within firms is really doing is we're just alleviating that initial confusion or anxiety for both the colleagues who are allies or just your everyday colleagues, such that when they join a Zoom call and they see someone that performs their gender in a way that they've never seen before, they're not distracted, and they're also not questioning things like, who's this colleague? Are they able to perform well? What is this even? But it's like, oh, I've heard of that before.
I guess there's one thing I did want to say. I didn't transition for a long time. And I think that gap is, well, it's certainly one of my most challenging stories, and even for me to begin to process what that time meant and what it was. But I'm not so sure that I would have stayed in that state trying to achieve this if I had been growing up surrounded by these concepts that now allow us to have non-binary individuals, that they, them was a valid pronoun choice for someone who was neither he nor she. That would have blown my mind. That would have truly changed so much. And what really would have changed a lot, if I had seen a transgender person, non-binary specifically, in just a position of seniority at any firm, in any industry, that would have been incredible. It would have meant the world, because just pointing to somebody and saying, see, here's somebody who is a professional and is doing well in their career and is just existing like anyone else you'd expect who I say those words about before I say, and they're non-binary. I didn't have anyone to look up to. I didn't. And I really want people, I'm not going to say that I'm some sort of great example. I just exist now. Because if I had seen somebody at this stage of their career that I'm at, when I was just coming in in the front door to my first job in the financial industry, it would have changed everything. It would have. I actually get a bit, emotional about it, because I keep thinking that because I can think about what it would have meant, and it would have changed everything. I definitely would have come out earlier. I definitely would have dealt with the things that I struggled with for so many years earlier, because somebody would have shown me that it's okay, and that it won't stop you. I think about it because there are transgender associates entering into various firms around the world now. And that's amazing to think that they're even coming in at the junior level, right? They're coming in right out of school, and they are not afraid to be who they are. That's incredible. I spent so many years living as someone I wasn't, and I became successful in that context. I really want to see them become successful from the start, being who they are, walking in that door on the first day as themselves, and going all the way up to where I am today. I really hope that that's what will happen. That's what I want to encourage. That's what I want to inspire, because that gap period where I tried to live as someone else was not a good time. And despite how much life was lived in it, it wasn't really my life. And God, I want to see them get to this point where they can look back at their whole professional lives and say, yeah, I was always me. I was always myself.
I'm getting emotional as well. That's exactly what I want to do with this podcast. I didn't see queer people succeed in everyday life who are older than me. And now I've had the privilege of being out of school for a few years and meeting all these fantastic people, including you, who are thriving in their respective careers. in various careers, not just, I think back then I was only really exposed to like successful queer musicians or artists, but you're in cybersecurity, I have lawyers on, I have, people in tech on, and absolutely, I agree. I felt like there was that gap, and now I see so many people have done what you've done on their own without seeing someone above them, and I genuinely hope that we both get to see the next generation of queer people being like, yeah, I'm non-binary, but so is the CEO.
Yeah, and that's going to be awesome, and I'm sure that will actually happen one day, which is so exciting to think about. Though it really is, to me, that aspect of hiding it or not hiding it. And that's the distinction that I'm most hopeful for the next generation of workers in any field. And this was a thing that I did because I believed it was the only way. I didn't do this because I believed anything negative about any places that I worked at, or anybody, or that anybody expressly told me you'll be punished. It was this deeply internalized sense that I don't want to take the risk. And I hope that that risk is easier to take when you see other people have taken it as well, and that they'll be able to not have that period where they didn't live their full selves, whether in the workplace or other places, just because they thought that they thought that it would be too difficult. I really hope that doesn't have to continue. I know that it will continue for some people in some conditions and such, but every little step counts, right? I really encourage people to go and read books from the mid 20th century, late 20th century about queer life and what they all in the end did for us against odds that I'm sure felt insurmountable. And we all have things today that we also feel are insurmountable. And one day, maybe we'll look back at them and say, how was that ever a challenge? How was that ever a question? But this is our current journey. This is our current stage, and we can only look one step ahead and try to be there to allow the next step to be taken after us.